Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, on this episode of The Wisdom of, I'm interviewing an Australian living in America, Matthew Pollard. Matthew has a pretty amazing story which I just want to share briefly in a couple of minutes, because I think it will guide a lot of what we talk about. But, you know, from a business point of view and from a success point of view, you probably need to know that Matthew is a certified professional speaker. He has started at a very young age, started 5 multi-million-dollar businesses, is a coach now to about now over 3,500 small business owners to learn how to rapidly grow their businesses. And what's interesting about this is, in this world that we live in, full of tips and tricks and hacks and shortcuts and shallow thinking, Matthew started out in school with I guess back in those days, Matthew, they would have considered it a disability, a visual processing disorder. I'm even interested in the term disorder, that perhaps led to some introversion. And then as you know, people troll through the rest of your life story, lots of these barriers that should have made you withdraw a bit from the world, that seemed instead to cause you to find a different solution for what you were trying to do and come up with a different and more effective way of doing things at each level. So it's an interesting background for anyone that feels like that. You know, you don't fit the exact high achiever mold, but you still want to make something great happen. And there is a pathway. But just leaning on the visual processing disorder initially and kind of what that meant for you, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I'm delighted to be on, and hopefully all the American listeners can understand two Australians yapping, because my accent gets stronger when I'm speaking to another Aussie. I actually won't even speak to my sister for half a day before I go on stage, just because all of a sudden some of the Australian slang starts to filter back into my conversational dialogue. But
That's funny.
I will say that, I feel that a lot of people have heard of the word dyslexia, and I was definitely misdiagnosed as dyslexic. I had a reading speed of a sixth grader in late high school, which led to me being super introverted and really not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. But luckily enough, I got diagnosed at the age of 16 with this thing called scotomic sensitivity syndrome. I don't know why people with, they create names for people with reading disabilities that are hard to spell and even hard to say. But it also is now called also Erlen syndrome, which basically means that I could put on a funny pair of colored lenses, which definitely didn't help me with my confidence, but I could start the process of learning to read. I couldn't read like everybody else, but I could start the process of learning to read. So the last 2 years of my high school were, I hustled like crazy and it was exhausting, but I managed to get up into the top 20% of my state. And funnily enough, teachers used to say beforehand that I wasn't applying myself. I was super smart, but I wasn't applying myself because they couldn't see the work that was happening behind the scenes. But when I was reading, I would be exhausted after a few hours. And for those people that have never heard of it, basically what it means is I have a light sensitivity, and you can have lots of different colors. I'm actually sensitive to the color yellow. And if you think about a white piece of paper, the spectrum of colors that are actually in white includes yellow. So what would happen for me is every letter that I would read would look different every time. So I never looked, because the white would eat the print in different ways every time. I never learned to decode letters, then words, and then sentences, and then paragraphs like a lot of people do. So when I put on these glasses, all of a sudden the letter would look the same every time, and then the word would look the same every time. I was just 16 years behind in my development, unfortunately. And even to this day, I still haven't caught up. So, even though I've written 2 books, both that I'm delighted to say have sold over 120,000 copies, are in 17 languages, the writing process for me is write, listen. When somebody sends me homework in my programs or my coaching one-on-one, or, even just as an email, I'll listen to it first and then I'll respond and then I'll listen to my response. It takes me more time. And yet, even given that disability, I've used strategies and systems, not silver bullet techniques, to slingshot past all of those people that are trying to find that silver bullet technique that more often than not I find leads them to feeling like they've got more full-time jobs, like posting dogs and donuts on social media or going to networking events and being transactional, or just walking out with a whole bunch of business cards because they didn't have a strategy and just things not going well. And I just feel, especially in business, that's just a path to failure. Like, you end up fighting on price, trying to convince and cajole people, not feeling authentic. If you're introverted like me, ruminating on the silly things that you probably said that you shouldn't have said. And so what I've found is, I think probably because of my Irlen syndrome, is that because I didn't just accept that dyslexia was my issue, and because I just accept the way the world was going to be, I found a solution that made my life better. And I've just found that always looking, not accepting the way the world works because it didn't work for me, but also taking complete responsibility for the problem, and then finding a strategy by living in what if thinking, and then putting a ridiculous amount of effort into solving the problem usually means to being able to outsell extroverts, being able to write books that have sold more than a lot of people that write naturally have been able to sell. It's led to all the success in my life.
It's interesting. You said that visual processing disorder forced you to, find systems to get through things, and even when you said write, listen, that's a system to deal with the way it's a mini system, if you like. And I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs are almost non-systems people, meaning they rely a lot on intuition, gut feel. Let's put this out there. Let's create a headline and sell it, and if people buy it, then we'll make the product. And all of this sort of thing. But you wrote, one of your books is The Introvert's Edge, and it's the, misconceptions about introverts, and it's really addressing introverts and being successful. I'd love to lean in on that a little bit. We don't often talk about, the world for introverts in business and being successful in business. And to be successful in business, you have to be successful in sales. And we both work in the sales arena. I'd like to lean in on some of the wisdom that you would share out of that Introvert's Edge. And for those that are listening, feel like that's them. I want them to feel like they've come home and they've found their person, kind of thing. What are the lessons out of that?
I think the biggest thing, well, firstly, let's address what introversion is, because I think people have overcomplicated it. And what's terrible is I did an event at the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, and that then it was so successful it led to them inviting me back for their leadership retreat. And I thought I'd just ask. This was like the top sales leader of every large tech finance company in the world, and I thought I'd just ask whether they were introverted or extroverted before the event. Truthfully, everybody benefits from a sales system, but I felt like it was worth knowing the answer, and I didn't. Instead of putting introvert, extrovert, or unknown, I just left it as a text field. And the number of people that wrote, "Oh, I was introverted, but don't worry, I'm not anymore," like it was a disease that they had to recover, was horrific. And it got me thinking, like, if you're in sales, working for one of these people, how could you feel comfortable sharing that you're an introvert? I feel like people even answer the questions in a way that allows it to get a different response, so they're more likely to get hired for certain roles. And so for me, when I talk about introversion, a lot of people say, "Oh, I was introverted, but I can switch on my extroversion." And the truth is, you can't change who you are. Now, if you switch on extroversion, you're going to find it exhausting you. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to be ruminating at night, and none of that's healthy. Now, rumination can be used as continuous improvement mindset, and that's really powerful. But for me, what I found is that you can't change who you are. Introversion is just this, where you draw your energy. That's it. Now, podcasts like this, speaking from stage, networking, sales, they all draw my energy. They draw it less because I've learned systems and processes to be more effective at it. And therefore, I also find it take less angst energy or mental energy as well. So because of that, even though I've got this big white light on me right now, it's still a lot more comfortable than it would have been in a dark room several years ago. Now, if you think about where I was, so I told you I had a reading speed of a sixth grader in late high school. Last 2 years were tough. My family knew that there was no way that I was going to succeed in university if I didn't know what I wanted to do. So we all agreed that I was going to take a year off to find myself. And so I took a job at a real estate agency. And if you think about the person out front selling, that's not me. I was the guy in the back office doing data entry. Look at my face, don't speak to me. I'm here to find myself. And for that year, I was expecting to just do data entry and not much else until my boss pulls me aside about 3 weeks in. And he's like, Matt, I'm so sorry to tell you this. They've just shut down this office. You're out of work. I'd worked there 3 weeks. And Simon, and you know this, living in Australia. I mean, we go on holidays on the 20th of December. Most Australians don't come back till the 15th or 20th of January. So no one's hiring around that period. And that's, just around the time I lost my job. I mean, I'm sitting here going into the summer and Christmas season in Australia, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to be able to find work. My dad breaks his back 80 hours a week supporting the family. There's no way I'm going home without something lined up. So I pick up the paper, and there's 2 jobs in the paper, and they both have these words, commission only sales. Now, I had horrible acne. I had to wear these funny colored lenses. There's a photo of me at my sister's wedding that I use at my presentations. I show for like a second because that's about the confidence that I have to show it. I just imagine people would see me and judge me before I even opened my mouth. I struggled to talk to my own friends. Commission only jobs, not really the place I wanted to be, but also didn't want to go home without a plan. So I applied for both jobs, and then I got 2 job interviews, and then I got 2 job offers. I'm like, well, hang on a second. Maybe they see something in me I don't see in myself. So I took a job doing business to business telecommunications sales. And I remember going in the first day with a little bit of quiet confidence. I got 2 job offers, right? And my trainer put that to bed really quickly. He's like, Matt, we just hire everyone. We've got this saying, we throw mud up against the wall, we see what sticks. Which, yeah, it sounds like a fun saying until you realize you're the mud, right? So I remember 5 days product training, getting thrown onto Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia, which is like hundreds of doors, one after the other, and get told to go sell, which sounds great, except no one taught me what to say. They just taught me about the product. So I take a deep breath and I go to walk into the first door. And luckily enough, I was politely told to leave. I say luckily enough because the second door I was sworn at, the third door I was told to get a real job, which was always my personal favorite. Door after door after door, this just kept happening until I got to my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And I remember, I made $70, which, for me was a lot of money back then. I used to work at McDonald's part-time through school, as we Aussies call it, Macca's. And I was ecstatic for about 45 seconds until I had my next realization. I got to do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. That was not okay. Now, I could have said, oh, I don't have the gift of gab. This is just the way it's going to be. But instead, I said, I believe sales is a system. This is what I mean by taking responsibility and living in what I'm thinking. What if it was a system? How would I learn that system was my next question. Well, I couldn't exactly pick up a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book that would have taken me a year to read, let alone apply. So what I did is I typed in sales system into YouTube, and all these videos came up. And all I did was spend 8 hours out in the field applying what I'd learned the night before or perfecting the next step in the process. And then I'd rush home and I'd spend 8 hours practicing. Weekends, I'd spend 16 hours practicing. Now, I'm sure to everyone listening, this doesn't sound fun, and truthfully, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And there are smarter ways to do it now. But soon it was 73 doors before my next sale, then 46, and then 21, and then 18, and then 9, and then 3. Eventually, I got it down to making a sale every 6 doors. Every 3 doors, from door to door telecommunications sales. And about 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside and he's like, I felt like I was going to get fired. I had that same look on his face. I've seen this before. And he says to me, Matt, we just got our national sales figures and we're kind of blown away by this. I mean, you're the quiet guy. Like, we never talk to you. You hand your paperwork in downstairs. You don't even connect with anybody upstairs. And we just got the report, and you're the #1 salesperson in the company, which just so happened to be the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. They employed thousands of salespeople. So he looks at me and he says, Matt, you can sell. I bet you can manage. I don't know why people think that's a thing. But he basically says to me, look, don't worry, we'll give you 20 people, mud up against the wall, see if anyone sticks. Everybody quit within 24 hours. But I went back to YouTube, learned to manage, and I got really good at it. So fast forward 12 months, I'd been promoted 7 times. Fast forward just shy of a decade, I'd been responsible for 5 multimillion-dollar success stories. But I think more importantly, I went from scared to sell to teaching hundreds how to do it. Now through the books, I get the opportunity to teach tens of thousands. And I think the most important learning is really that introverts can learn systems to do all of these so-called extroverted arenas. And I say so-called extroverted arenas because I believe that introverts with the right strategies make the best salespeople, the best networkers, the best leaders, because they're consistent, they follow a methodical process, and truthfully, a system will always outperform a winged process. Maybe not on the occasional day, because we all know a salesperson's ability is largely based on their mood, but week by week, month by month, we will outsell them hands down. And because we hold that process for dear life, we hold that networking process for dear life, we get better and better at it till we beat them almost every day, if not every day.
Yeah, it's really very interesting. The old sales arena used to talk about the gift of the gab, which really basically means make it up on the fly, right? And yet a well-rehearsed sales conversation that has been tested and improved through test and measure will outperform somebody making it up on the fly or winging it, as we say, conversation after conversation. And we also do live in this world, both leadership and sales world, where the extroversion energy can sometimes feel like it has to consume the introversion energy, and as you've said several times, make it like an extrovert. And it's this complete mismatch of the two worlds, when in fact what we should be trying to do as leaders is get the best out of the person that's in front of us. The Gallup research on volunteer engagement, and what are the great leaders of the highest performing teams in the world do differently to everybody else? Well, the first thing is they believe you should spend more time getting out of the person what is already in there than trying to put into them what they don't have. So spend more time as a leader trying to get the real brilliance of each individual out of them, rather than pouring into them your style or perspective, because we're talking about styles more than anything else. And so, there's this skills gap. If we'll leave this whole sense of introversion in a minute, because I want to talk a bit about, rapid growth and so on. But if you were giving a young entrepreneur who recognizes themselves as an introvert, but also recognizes themselves as a highly motivated, driven individual that wants to actually do something significant, and you got a chance to give them one piece of advice, what would that advice be? They might not have even had some kind of learning, challenge, but that they're introvert. They're introvert. That's just how they are. What advice would you give them as they head off on this journey of success that they want to pursue?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are a couple of things you touched on there. So the first thing I would say is, because you touched on sales scripting and having a planned process, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to sound scripted. I don't want to sound like a robot. And that makes perfect sense. Everybody listening's had somebody call them at 7 o'clock at night where they're taking their kid to dinner. They're getting their kids ready for bed or sitting them down to dinner, and the phone rings and they sound robotic. And I never want to sound like that. And so actually one of the things, and I do a lot of sales kickoff events and actually a lot of global events on storytelling. And funnily enough, one story we created for an insurance company, actually, because one of the Gallup polls was, one of the survey questions is, does your best friend work at the organization? And if the answer is no, it's one of the biggest signals to somebody willing to leave or thinking about leaving. And one person got really upset about that, then realized it was their own fault because a lot of their friends had left, but they'd not been developing relationships with new people, mentoring, and all the things that they should be doing as a leader. And so we created this great story about his realization and how he's now happy and he's helping all these people. And now whenever somebody hits that friction point, we make sure that they hear that story. It's the same story every time. But the difference is, if you think about, and when I taught this, when I teach this at sales kickoffs, I talk about this guy, Alex, who was, an introverted guy who had a chronic stutter. And I talk about the science of why storytelling works. And I talk about the fact that people remember 22 times more information when embedded into a story. The fact that it activates the reticular activating system of the brain, which creates artificial rapport, which is why I start with stories when I walk up on stage. And that it short circuits the logical mind and speaks directly to the emotional mind, which is the buying center anyway. And I said, so let's pick one story, remember that story, learn to tell it well. And he's like, I don't want to do scripting. And I said, well, I get that. But actually, out of interest, what's your favorite movie? And he's like, oh, I love Gangs of New York. And I said, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio is amazing in that, isn't it? Did you know he was an introvert? He's like, no, I had no clue. I said, he just embodies the part, though, doesn't he? He's like, well, yeah, he's phenomenal. And I said, well, he's also reading a script. And he's like, well, yeah, but it's different. It comes across as authentic. I'm like, what do you think that difference is? It's just practice. So when you think about scripting, the reason why it sounds scripted, or the telemarketers sound scripted, is because they're reading from a script. But if you learn one great story, I don't even suggest a whole sales system. If you learn one great story, then you can transform the entire sales process, because instead of jamming information down their throat that they didn't ask for and overwhelming them with jargon, which is why you end up with long sales cycles and having to write these ridiculously long proposals, if you share one story of somebody that you work with that you got an amazing result, or if you're trying to sell to a potential best talent for a tech company and you don't want to lose them to a big company like a Microsoft or an Apple that have the name recognition, then you want to talk about your culture. But if you learn to tell it and learn to tell it well so it doesn't sound scripted, you can focus more on what they said and how to make it relevant to them. You can be more present in the sale. And that's what Alex found. I mean, for someone that, I mean, he actually managed to get appointments but couldn't close them. He was struggling to make even six figures between him, his father, and his wife. And, within the space of less than a year, he was nearly $1 million business. So if you can do that, really simple things make such a difference. And if you plan and prepare them, they're, huge milestones. So the advice that I would give to someone that's young, that's just getting started, is know that you could be one tiny skill away from being successful in anything you put your mind to. Yeah. But for the average person that's in school, the best example I can give you, there's a story in my my second book about on networking where I wrote this. The only reason I wrote it, because writing a book for me is a lot of work and a lot of listening to a really bad robot voice. And so because of that, I chose to write it because a kid picked up my sales book because his dad had left it on the coffee table, the dining room table or coffee table in Buffalo, New York, in a house in Buffalo, New York. And he read my sales book and said to himself, if Matt can teach himself a sales system to learn how to sell, I bet that I can make a system out of making friends. And he literally carried my book around, if you can imagine that, around the corridors at school. But before you knew it, this kid that wore his hoodie and wouldn't make eye contact with people, the hoodie was gone. He was making eye contact. He was now friends with some of the popular kids. And next thing you know, there was a girl in the picture. His life is different, not because he learned my sales system, but because he learned there was always a system and process, a methodical system and process that allow him to not pretend he was someone else, because that's a recipe for disaster, but lean into his natural strengths, be his authentic self, and connect with people in a more strategic way that was meaningful. And for those people that do use an elevator pitch in a networking room, it's so transactional. That sounds scripted. I'm not suggesting that kind of behavior. But what I'm also not suggesting is going in there aimlessly either. What I learned, and when I moved and left Australia, the network I'd spent a lifetime awkwardly fostering, and moved to Austin, Texas, where I didn't know a soul, a year later, I was invited to events as one of the most connected people in the city. And it was because I put more authentic, systematic process to networking. And what I'm trying to highlight here is it can be applied to anything, especially the so-called extroverted behaviors.
Well, I was just about to say, when people say, oh, I don't want to sound scripted, I don't want to use a sales script. We help people build visual models to sell and explain complex things, right? The real magic that we wrapped around the models is what we call choreography. And so I studied stage magic and comedy to unpack the choreography that a magician or a comedian uses to trigger extraordinary curiosity in the audience, collapse the paradigm they think they're understanding, and introduce a new paradigm in a heartbeat. No one looks at a great comedian and thinks, well, they're a bit scripted, but they are 100% choreographed, including what they're saying in the middle of that, right? And the same with a great magician. There's a lot going on when a magician is doing a trick on stage, both physically, covering angles and hiding things, while they're also, your brain can't cope with everything all at once. Mm-hmm. And whether you're an introvert or extrovert is actually irrelevant. Your brain can't manage everything at once. You have to automate some parts of it. And so you automate the parts of it that then allow you to be authentically you. And that's when it doesn't feel like scripting, because you've automated the story in your example. so that it's going to come out anyway, but it allows it to come out as authentically you. And of course, the subtext for everyone watching the episode is this is not actually a guide for introverts. This is actually a guide for everybody. And a key in there is get a system, practice and preparation. You know,
It's really interesting.
the
You
world's
say
elite
that.
sports athletes practice and prepare. They don't make it up on the fly. They figure out a game plan. They get a system for play. And that's how you win the NFL or the NBA or a World Cricket Series or whatever the sport is you're following. Get a system, put a game plan in place, practice and prepare, and then on game day, you get to come out your individual genius in those nanoseconds that make the difference. This is not a methodology for introverts. Actually, it's a methodology for anyone that wants rapid results, rapid growth. So let's actually talk about, this idea of rapid growth. It's what you help a lot of entrepreneurs with. I'd love to unpack a little bit of the thinking of that system. Let's view rapid growth as a system. And I'd love to just highlight a few things for people that are in business, but they want to actually have a rapid growth path. What are some of the aspects of that system that you've been able to figure out over the years and unpack? I know we've been talking about sales, but I'm sure there's more to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I believe if you start with sales, you've kind of already lost because they're already seeing you as a functional provider. So we need to get people out of that. And very similar, it's funny that you talk about the paradigm shift. So, I believe that, well, Matt Dixon talks about in his book, The Challenger Sale, that if you can give somebody asks you for what they want and you give them exactly what they want, they'll fight you on price, timeline, and they won't be loyal. But if you if you give them a paradigm shift, help them see something different, they won't fight you on price, they won't fight you on timeline, and they'll be incredibly loyal. So storytelling is the best way to give someone a paradigm shift to help them see that what their single point solution, if you like, that they think they want is actually not in their best interest. But again, if you start with sales you've already lost, what you want to do is get people to see you differently all the way from the very beginning. So the best example I can give you, I worked with a language coach. She taught kids and adults Mandarin a long time ago, and for over a decade, she'd been charging $50 to $80 an hour for private consultation. And when she came to me, she's like, look, there's all these people that are moving into California willing to charge $30 to $40 an hour. Thanks to the global economy we're now living in, I've got to deal with people in China offering to do it for $12 an hour on Craigslist. And thanks to our friends in Silicon Valley, I'm now, there's people that will say, hey, Simon, you teach me Mandarin, I'll teach you English. We just won't charge anyone anything. So now she's competing against free. So she comes to me, she's like, I'm losing current clients. I'm struggling to get new clients. Can you teach me sales techniques? And I said, look, yes, I can. And I believe that anybody benefits from a sales system. And you're right, it's not just for introverts. Like if you've got a business that you ever one day hope to sell, if you're an extrovert and you're the primary salesperson in your business, good luck selling your business. And if you've got a whole bunch of extroverts that fly by the seat of their pants, that's unpredictable sales, harder to sell your business, and the buyer also knows that they're more likely to leave, so less likely to buy your business. So you want introverts that believe their sales script with you or their sales process with you is the reason for why they're amazing, because then they'll last the test of time, make your business a lot more sellable. So for Wendy, I said, look, while I can help you with the sales process, I prefer to avoid the battle altogether. So I started to look through all the clients that she worked with over the years. And what I realized is while she'd worked with hundreds, there were two executives specifically she helped with more than just language tuition. And let me be clear, if you've ever received a testimonial or a referral, you know that you do as well. I mean, nobody says, hey, Simon, I've got to introduce you to this guy, Matt. I mean, he does everything just like everybody else, right? There's always something that they're excited about. You just don't know how to articulate it, and you definitely don't bring it up in the sale. So I started to look at it, and what I realized is for Wendy, what she did is she helped these two executives realize the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world, the importance of respect, how to handle a business card the right way in China, why you've got to just not only reduce learn the language, but reduce your accent, and also the difference of rapport. Like in Australia and the United States where I live now, anywhere, a lot of places in Europe, if I, at the end of 45 minutes, was really bad at sales and said, do you want to move forward? If you say you want to think about it now and next week, I know the chances of you getting that sale are pretty much nothing. In China, they're going to want to see you 5 or 6 times before they discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just the kind of person you're selling to, because they're talking about 20 to 50-year deals, not transactional contracts. Like, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. What are you doing? She's like, they're just a few things. I'm just trying to help. I'm like, look, you're stuck in your functional skill. Is it fair to assume as a result of the assistance that you're giving these people, they're going to be more successful when they get to China? And she's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? I said, well, great. Well, then let's call you the China Success Coach. Let's forget about Mandarin education for a second. Let's create what we ended up calling the China Success Intensive, which was a 5-week program that worked with the executive, the spouse, and any children being relocated to China. And then I said, look, now that we've got this, well, she was excited about it. She's like, well, who do I sell it to? And I said, well, who do you think? She's like, well, obviously the executive. Well, yeah, I mean, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States. Imagine going to China. That'd be terrifying. I don't even speak the same language. I said, I don't think it's your ideal client, though. She's like, well, maybe it's the company. They've got millions of dollars riding on the executive being successful. Like, yeah, maybe. I still don't think it's that. Now she's frustrated with me. She's like, well, who then? And I said, I think it's the immigration attorney. Now she looks at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. And I'm like, well, think about it for a second. These people make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing all the paperwork, all the bureaucracy that comes with a visa. They've got staff to pay for, rent to pay for, customer acquisition costs. They'd be lucky to make $3,000 at the end of that. I said, just offer them $3,000 for a simple introduction that results in a sale. They loved the idea. They're like, double my income for a simple introduction? Sure. What do I have to say? And she just had them say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated to China. And they would always say something, overconfident executive. I think we're set. We got our place sorted. We're learning the language. Kids are getting pretty good at it too. We got our visa now. Thank you. I think we're good to go. And she would just have them respond with, there's actually a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China Success Coach. She'd then get on the phone with the easiest sale in the world. These people were terrified to go. The organization was motivated to pay, and they were recommended by their attorney. She charged $30,000 for doing this, minus a $3,000 commission. She made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world instead of hustling every day to make $50 to $80 an hour in a crowded market. That is rapid growth. And that comes from the power of what I call a strong and unified message. Because what you need to be thinking about is, who do I want to network to meet? How am I going to be different? How am I going to, because I believe that when you're networking, the whole goal of mastering the networking room is never having to go back to one. So if you want to be the clearest, you don't have to be the loudest. If you're forced to be the loudest, then you also have to be the loudest on social media. It's exhausting. So for me, I came up with this concept when I went to a networking event, and I was like, when I moved from Australia to the United States, I had to start again. And so the first time I remember being at just my apartment complex while we were looking for a place, and I had somebody talk to me about how much they loved their business, which was a gym itself, actually. And then they asked me what I did, and I said, oh, I'm a sales trainer. And they looked at me like I was one step above a scam artist. And then I'm like, I'm never doing that again. And so, I mean, I ended up defending myself to this person. I wasn't trying to get a client, but it felt like I was selling to him. I was just trying to make a friend. The next time I said I was in marketing, and they were like, oh, I need marketing. How much do you cost? The next time it's like, oh, we're working with someone in marketing. What am I supposed to say? Oh, I'm different. I got magic ruby slippers. So that's why I call myself the rapid growth guy, because I didn't want to do the elevator pitch. I do this for this group of people, even if it sounded so transactional. And that's what I noticed that most best practice networking strategy talks about. And then I realized that I couldn't even get into the functional of what I did after that, because the great thing about saying, thanks for asking, I'm the rapid growth guy or the China Success Coach, is somebody then leans forward and says, what exactly is that? Now you've got permission to tell them. And I would just respond with, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. But what I find, and I just hate seeing this, is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, really feeling like people only care about one thing: price. Do you know anyone like that? Now, if I've researched the room beforehand, of course they do. Or they're probably that person because I've connected in advance. So I will then respond with, well, I'm on a mission to help people like yourself realize you really can have a rapid growth business doing what you love, just not by getting better at your functional skill. You're probably amazing at that, but instead just focusing on 3 things outside the scope of that that'll really allow you to build a business that rolls around you, your family, and your life. Actually, let me give you an example. Then I might tell the Wendy story. What you'll notice is I didn't talk about what I do because nobody cares. They don't care what you do until they see that you care. And stories are better to explain what you do. I also hooked them and I shared my passion. Instead of talking about me, I shared my passion for changing the world, my care for helping others. And again, that is so important. So that's the difference when you're looking at attracting prospects that see you as the only logical choice versus people that see you as somebody that they'll drill down on price because there's so many options.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of growth is fascinating. I am constantly saying to people, every dollar you spend on delivery on the back end is overcapitalization if you haven't figured out how to invest on the front end, which is getting a client. Um, we talk a lot in the work we do about, clarity is actually not enough. It's the clarity that counts that matters. And Wendy, through you, arrived at this clarity that counts. It's not about Mandarin, it's about what that can do. And, when I'm speaking at conferences, I'll often say, look, I disagree with Simon Sinek. And there's a powerful intake of breath in the room that someone would dare to say, I disagree with Simon Sinek, right? But, Simon says people don't care what you do until they know why you do it. It would be much more accurate to say people don't care what you do until they know that they are the reason why you do it. And there's a world of difference between those two statements, right? And so, the clarity that counts in the context of helping somebody else win and also keep them safe, which are the two big things that we sell. We make people safe and we help them win, drives the front end of business. What's also interesting about what you've just outlined was none of that can actually be taken away by AI and the world that we live in today, because that is all a function of deep thinking about not the marketplace, but the people you want to serve. We group so much up into, well, what is the market? What's the niche? And it becomes faceless, as opposed to, well, who is the individual that I want to serve? And I can figure out how to do that and then find lots of those individuals. I'll get rapid growth through networks and connections and things like that. It's a fascinating pathway. We could talk about lots and lots of things. And we could weave what I'd ask people to think about is do the translation of what we've been talking about today, this thread that's been carried through between what we think is the difference between extroverts and introverts and how they approach the world. But we're actually really talking about a methodology based on build a system, practice and prepare for it, get crystal clear, the clarity that counts about who you serve and what you do for them. Go and find those individuals rather than generalized language like a niche, and then systemize all of that to such an extent that the thing that really can't be systemized, which is your authenticity, can actually show up without exhausting you, because you're not trying to manage every dimension that's in play. And so we could think about this in terms of sales and serial entrepreneurship and innovation. We're kind of running out of time, but I have no doubt that you have a system for innovation when you want to look at something new or create something new, systems around, maximizing ROI. But, in real estate, the saying is location, 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 and you make your money when you buy the property. I think the same is true in business. You make your money on the sale, not on the delivery. You make it on the front end. You could, spend $3,000 to get a client worth $30,000. How many times a week would you do that? Every single day, as often as you get the opportunity, kind of thing. So we could cover a lot of territory, but what I'd love to do just to wrap up is ask you 3 quick questions through the lens of someone with your story, and your way of seeing the world, and just get quick responses and let people find out a little bit more about Matthew through the questions. You up for that game?
Sounds great.
So I'm just interested, if you could time travel to any period in history, when and where and why would you go there? So what part of history really interests you that you'd want to go back and be able to be a fly on the wall?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like there's a whole bunch of them. I think that I would love to go back to, Rome. I'm a massive fan of everything Rome. So going back there or seeing the old Egyptian world would be amazing. I wouldn't want to live the life they lived back then, but I'd pop in for 6 to 12 hours. Absolutely. I also feel like going back to the days where, people were far more, I don't want to say more innovative, because the fact of the matter is there's some amazingly innovative ideas coming out now in the world. But back in the days where there wasn't much innovation, there were people that thought differently, around the the aeroplane being invented, the
Mm.
motor car, those sorts, that era, it really isn't that long ago. Surprise, I mean, blows my mind, even how long ago the printing press was invented, which wasn't that long ago. But the kind of era where people were starting to realize how much more they could do with very simple, a lot of fuel propelled technologies.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, second quick question. If you could, so we talked about practice, preparation, right? Build a system. But if you could actually instantly master any skill without any practice, you just woke up and you had the skill, what would you love? What skill would you love to have? Why would you want that skill?
You know what? I would love to be able to be really fit all the time. I think that's probably because that leads to lifelong health, lifelong. And for me, I'm a big believer in balance. So for me, I'll do podcasts like this and I'll do them in batches, but then I forgive myself and I give myself time to sit in a dark room and recharge. I think for me, knowing I feel like everybody can get better at looking after their health, and that's definitely one for me. I'd also love to finally be able to ski because as an Australian, you probably agree with me. There's not much snow to learn on, and my gosh, it's embarrassing to not know how to surf. So I definitely want to take that one up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's no snow in Western Australia, but there's plenty of surfing. But yeah, yeah, we've got a lot of coast, we've got no mountains. What song best kind of describes you and your life, do you think? I don't know if you're a music fan, but
Yeah, so there's actually a song called "Remember My Name." And there's a couple of profanity words in it, which is a shame. Otherwise, I would definitely use it. And I have used it as a theme song as I walk up on a lot of stages. But it's about that most people think he's got a natural ability, but it's the hustle, it's the work, it's the fact that he does it religiously every day, and he's not available like everybody else is, because he's behind the scenes working really, really hard. And I love that. Now, don't get me wrong, the hustle mindset, hate it unless it's behind a great strategy. I feel like a lot of people just jump on the hustle bit, and that is exhausting and often leads to failure. I feel though with a great strategy, then hustle makes sense. Like, for instance, a lot of people will say it's better to have a bad book with great marketing than a good book with bad marketing. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you not have a great book with great marketing? And usually it's because somebody's got a great idea, they write a great book, but they don't have a great strategy for marketing it, or they have a natural ability to market, but then they'll just wing the book. So I'm a
yeah,
big believer in hustle with great strategy.
fantastic. I love that. What a great note to end on, Matthew. I really appreciate it. I love interviewing Australians on the podcast. I love interviewing Australians doing things on a worldwide stage. We're a small population in global terms, but we've been able to produce some some notable success stories. So thank you very much for joining me on the podcast, and I look forward to maybe we'll meet up one day in Scottsdale or wherever we might actually be. All right.
That sounds
Thank you.
terrific. Well, thank you for having me on.
Pleasure.